One day, your phone buzzes. A friend, someone you used to love talking to, and you stare at it, not with anger, not with sadness, just nothing. You let it ring, and the silence that follows doesn't bother you the way it once would have. That's the moment most people panic. What's wrong with me? But what if nothing is wrong? What if your soul is simply done pretending? You used to be different, more available, more enthusiastic. You'd answer every message, show up to every gathering, laugh at every joke. But somewhere along the way, something shifted. Quietly, without warning. People started feeling like effort. Conversations started feeling hollow. And you started craving silence the way you once craved connection. This isn't laziness. This isn't depression, though it can look like it. This is something psychologists are only beginning to fully understand. And if you've ever felt yourself slowly withdrawing from people without knowing why, stay with us. Because what's happening inside you is far more complex and far more human than you've been told. Let's start at the root. Psychologists call it social exhaustion withdrawal. When the nervous system, after years of overextending in relationships, simply begins rationing connection. Think of it like a battery that was never properly charged. You gave, you listened, you showed up, again and again, and no one ever asked if you were running low. So the mind does what the mind always does. It protects you. It pulls you inward. And what feels like losing interest in people is actually your psyche building a wall between you and further depletion. But here's what's important to understand. The wall isn't the problem. The wall is the symptom. The real question is, what drained you in the first place? For many people, it begins with chronic inauthenticity in relationships. Years of conversations where you performed instead of connected, where you nodded instead of disagreed, where you laughed when you didn't find it funny, and stayed quiet when you had something real to say. Over time, the brain begins to associate people with performance, and performance is exhausting. So eventually, the brain sends one quiet signal. Stop going to the show. Here's the part most people never talk about. Losing interest in people doesn't always mean you've become cold. Sometimes it means you've finally developed taste. Because when you stop tolerating shallow connection, something unexpected happens. Your standards for human interaction quietly rise. Small talk starts to feel unbearable, not because you're antisocial, but because you've tasted depth and can't go back. You'd rather sit alone than spend 2 hours in a conversation that leaves you feeling more empty than when you arrived. Psychologists call this intimacy recalibration. Your definition of meaningful connection has evolved, but your environment hasn't caught up. And that gap between what you need and what's available is what looks from the outside like isolation. But here's what no one tells you. The people who lose interest in surface-level connection are often the ones most capable of profound, lasting intimacy. They're not closing off. They're becoming more selective. And there is nothing wrong with that. If this is resonating with you, consider sharing this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't already, subscribe, because we go this deep every single week. Now let's talk about what this does to your identity, because one of the most unsettling parts of withdrawing from people is that it can feel like losing yourself. You start to wonder, am I becoming someone I don't recognize? Am I lonely, or am I just different now? Both can be true, and holding that tension is part of the process. The people who experience this shift most intensely are often those who spent years being everything to everyone. The listener, the helper, the one who never said I need something too. When that person finally stops performing, the silence can feel strange, even frightening. Not because they're broken, but because for the first time, they're finally alone with themselves and they're not sure they know who that is. That is the quiet grief at the center of this experience. Not grief over people, grief over the version of yourself that needed people's approval to feel whole. That version is dissolving, and dissolution, even when it's necessary, hurts. So what do you do with this? You don't force yourself back into connection that doesn't serve you. You don't perform enthusiasm you don't feel. Instead, you get curious. You ask yourself, what kind of connection actually fills me now? What conversations make me feel alive? Who leaves me feeling more like myself, not less? Those answers will point you toward the relationships worth rebuilding and the ones worth releasing with grace. Here's the truth no one prepared you for. Growing into a deeper, more selective person is one of the loneliest transitions a human being can make, because you outgrow rooms before you find your people. You'll sit in silences that used to terrify you and realize they no longer do. And one day, without announcing it, you'll stop shrinking yourself to fit into connections that were never built for who you're becoming. That's not losing people. That's finally becoming someone worth knowing. If this video made you feel seen, share it with one person who needs it.